Hey, what's going on YouTube? Chronos here, and welcome back to another PSO2 video. So today's video, we're going to talk about, uh, how can I put this? There's been this concern floating around the PSO community about the new 15-star weapon that's popped up, and the current 15-star weapons, and of course, the existential dread that is, should we make these weapons? Aren't my weapons going to become outdated? So I figured I would go ahead and record this video a little earlier than I was planning to. Um, just because it's something that I've seen pop up not only in my stream, but in multiple other PSO2 streams itself, where people are extremely concerned about their weapons and putting time into them, as well as investing resources into them, and should or should they not do this, and of course other people offering advice, so on and so forth, about whether or not this should be something that's done. And how currently I personally believe skipping these two 15 stars, the first ones, probably the biggest mistake you can make when it comes to 15-star weapons, if you were going to choose any to skip. Now, the good news is that if you invested in any of these two weapons itself, longevity of these weapons is going to exist. There's never going to be a time where people are going to be upset with you for using one of these weapons as a 15-star that's properly set up. They have a lot of different reasons where they're going to be fairly powerful, and we're going to talk about why, even if they aren't your main DPS weapons. So, this is a disclaimer. These use cases will not fit every single class and every single individual. It is still a good idea to have something like the Fleet PSO2 Discord opened up, taking a look at your specific class guides and taking a look at how these weapons affect your specific class itself. There may be certain situations where some weapons might be more beneficial over others. For example, myself playing Bouncer, I personally really wouldn't be concerned about making Lightstreamer, Trailblazer, Soaring Blades when something like the Jupiter Tullus exists, where that weapon itself is actually going to push more damage on average than the Lightstream weapon with its current potential itself, while the Jupiter Tullus has its plus potential available to it. And there's some of these use cases that pop out for different classes around all over the place. So I will say that yes, it's not going to be the case for every single situation. We are going to talk about how these weapons are made, what campaigns are currently going on to make life easier for you, how I personally made my versions of the weapons itself, and the choices that I made. A little bit of this is going to be a repeat in one of my other videos. It'll be releasing relatively soon, showing how I made my Lightstream weapons and talking about why I made the Lightstream weapons that I did. But without further stalling, as we usually do from this box streamer, let's talk about what we'll be doing. So in the community itself, some people have been recommending to players, more or less, to just skip over the Lightstream weapons. And I can understand why. These weapons can be fairly expensive to make if you're not thinking about how you're using them currently, or if you're not paying attention to what's available to you. One of the biggest reasons why these weapons are fairly easy to make at the moment is we do have a campaign going on for Road to Episode 6. We have a zero mistake cost campaign, as well as enhancement boosting campaigns that are going to help you out with augmenting and upgrading these weapons itself. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, or talk about that a little bit later on the video, and kind of how you can use that to your advantage with making some of these weapons. But we're going to start out with talking about how useful, or where these weapons are going to be useful moving forward. So let's jump into that. First, we're going to start out with Atlas. Now, Atlas EX is pretty much a no-brainer. We've had the ability to make this weapon, or prepare for this weapon, for a very long time. We were able to make the Lumiere weapon, we were able to make the Atlas weapon and use that for quite some time, and then upgrade into the Atlas EX. Now, the Atlas EX is useful for a few different reasons, primarily because of its S-grade augment slots. It's got S1 through S4 available to it, where S1 through S3 usually is going to be damage-based, S4 is going to usually be utility-based, as far as these weapons tend to go. Now, keep in mind the two weapons we're going to be talking about today both have plus potentials, bringing them up to, if not slightly past, later weapons that'll be available down the line because of the power jump for those weapons itself. And just so you guys know, we're over on the JP wiki right now just because they have this kind of nice little layout of being able to see these weapons. Now, the Atlas weapons did require a bit more management of the things you need to make them. I'll go ahead and pop these open really quick. These pages want to load. Yeah, okay. So these did require taking a Val weapon with some materials and a time reversal chrono stone to get the Atlas base, and the Lumiere did require a few of these weapons that upgrading, I believe this one was kind of a pain. Upgrading this one was a little bit of a pain as well. This one wasn't too bad, but it did require a bit of work originally making this, but all of the ones later on down the line, they've pretty much given to us mostly for free. So it's been fairly inexpensive, fairly simplistic to make. So that's nice. And they've literally given us a free Atlas EX. They gave us a free Atlas EX gun slash and the materials to weapon change it into any weapon category that you wanted. So as far as getting one of these, no brainer, you should have one. Now, why should you have one specifically is not only does it have the ability to use if your specific weapon category type doesn't have a great one, it has the ability to use a really good S4s, something like say PP management from Partisan, or something like say Vampiric Strike from what's the other one? Gunslash. I want to say Gunblade, Gunslash. Basically, it has the ability to use Vampiric Strike from that weapon itself, making this weapon a very, very, very survivable weapon. Thinking about class combinations like Gunner Fighter, where you want to keep high PP to keep your perfect attack up. Not perfect attack, but perfection, or whatever the heck that skill is called. Basically, when you have over 75% HP, you get a damage bonus. You want to have that up all the time, as much time as you possibly can have it up, if not all the time. And this does help that out, along with Gunner Fighter just being more damage overall for them now these days, especially with S4 arts being out. So goodbye Sub Hunter for you gunners out there. You finally can get you can finally sub Fighter with your Gunner class and not feel like you're all living on the razor's edge anymore. And later on class combinations like Bouncer Phantom or just sub Phantom classes without the ability to self-heal, or that used Hunter as their self-healing choice, having this S4 is fairly powerful, and this weapon actually ends up being one of the better choices for them. In some cases, like we'll say Tekker, it's S4 for Wand Clobber is really, really powerful, and they actually choose this over the their Lightstream choice as well, just because of how powerful that S4 is. Now, all of those things said, that's actually not the reason that you hold on to this weapon for so long. The reason you hold on to this weapon for so long is Immortal Soul. It's a one-shot protection weapon. So in situations where you think you might absolutely get dominated or get destroyed, and you think you don't trust yourself to completely dodge something, but you still want to give it a shot, you can do a hot swap over to this weapon and continue to deal damage, while also having the ability to survive a hit that might normally kill you. As well as if you have something like healing on this, you can then heal yourself back up. Now, that could be the use for this weapon for some people. Again, it might not be for everyone, but having one of these in your back pocket is a really, really nice thing to have. S4 utility with S1 through S3 damage possibility, or even in some cases utility, can be very, very powerful. If not your best weapon, definitely something good to have on hand, just in case. So we'll go over to the reason this video even exists in the first place, the Lightstream or the Trailblazer. So the Lightstream's effect on just its potential is mostly why this weapon is so powerful. Now, it's got crazy good base damage. It's got support for S1 through S3, but its effect is whenever you use a PA while under 10% PP, you fully regen your PP up to max. And for 30 seconds, you get increased 3% damage on top of the 10% you already have for having this thing maxed out. So 13% damage for 30 seconds. Doesn't sound like a huge amount. It's mostly the PP regen that you get, so it does some crazy high, you have some crazy high burst damage potentials with just draining your PP down all the way and then still being able to keep going again. That does have an internal cooldown of 120 seconds, and before anyone asks, that is across all Lightstream weapons you would have on your palette, so it's across your entire character. You can't switch to another Lightstream weapon and then just do this again. That would make Hero busted. It would make Hero beyond broken, actually, which would be kind of funny. However, it is still a fairly strong option, but not the reason why this conversation is brought up. Mostly because of Strike Boost. Now, Strike Boost will explain the way this works. It's called Melee Amp over on Global. Now, what this does is every 60 S attack or melee power you affix to your weapon, it increases its power by 1%, going by up to 2% if you reach 200. So once you reach 200, you get 2% more on top of what you already have for affixing it. Meaning the goal of this weapon is to augment or affix 200 main stat on it. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you realize this thing has S1 through S3, meaning that you only have 5 extra slots at the end of the day to push that extra 200 melee power. You're probably thinking, well, you could just drop the S2 and S3. No, you don't want to do that. S2 and S3 slots are actually crazy powerful for weapons like this. You don't want to miss out on them. It's actually better to, in this case, go with a lower augmentation rate or go with a lower amount augmented to the weapon, not getting the full use out of strike boost, than it would be to drop S2 or S3, because these can be potentially 2 to 4% increased damage per slot, which is big because, of course, it's percent based damage, not flat damage. Super useful there. Now, how can we make this weapon without absolutely killing ourselves over it? Well, first off, I'll show you guys what I did for my weapon itself. So when I set up my weapon originally, and in case anyone's curious about this, is just the augmentation, or I'm sorry, this is the affix assistant. I'll put a link in the video description to where this is, and of course mine specifically. But this is what I chose to do. Now, some of you guys, some of the perceptive ones amongst you, probably noticed that I used Grand Might. Grand Might is fairly expensive, and expensive at the moment as well. The reason I use Grand Might is, at the time of recording this video, there's currently a support scratch going, so Grand Might was selling for about 29 to 30 mil. Now, you could drop, in a sense, Vinculum and use something like Modulator, then swapping Grand Might to Grace Might, which sounds like it's saving you a ton of money. However, even if you picked up Modulator or a Modulator SAF before all of the before the boost week happened, during boost week, it's been worth around 30 mil. I actually sold the one that I had for 30 mil, which is insane. The reason I went this route instead was I kind of did a bit of math, and it ended up being almost about the same price. It was a difference about my route being about 4 to 3 mil cheaper, depending upon how lucky you got with some sales. That Grand Might actually was the cheaper choice, and I gained some HP and 1 point of PP out of it. So I figured, you know what? Let's just go the route of Grand Might. It's a bit easier for me, and I end up gaining, or I end up technically saving some money and gaining a little bit of stats. Not really the end of the world. It does feel nice having the extra HP because I'm taking something like Percent of Reverie, which I don't really like to take, but useful for this weapon and this weapon only. Now, there are other options of things you can set up. I'm sure people have different choices. I know some people were using things like Mana Reverie because the Reveries are fairly inexpensive right now. There is also the option of doing something like, I'll show you guys really quick over on the support scratch. Oh yeah, the new SG support scratch, or the new SG scratch is up. Lovely. Over on the support items pack scratch, in the bonus list, you have Mark Succession, which adds Mark Receptor onto an item. You could use that to transfer Mark augmentations over, making it possible to make a 7-slot version of this at 200, which is pretty crazy. I haven't personally looked into doing that. I know it's possible. I just don't know the exact formula for it. Didn't really want to get into it now. You guys can play around with that on your own, figure that sort of stuff out yourselves. Now, let's say worst case scenario, you can't afford to do any of these things, right? Like my affix was probably about 40 to 45 mil. That's not really feasible for everyone. Maybe you can only afford to make this weapon, because honestly, making this weapon is really easy. The most difficult part of it is doing the urgent quest to get enough of these stones. That's really about it. Getting all of these weapons are fairly inexpensive off the market if you have to buy them. If you don't want to buy them and you want to use Rising Weapon Badge 4s, you happen to have tons of those, you can use those. Upgrading them is extremely inexpensive as well. Like I mentioned before, we have the Boost Road campaign itself. I'm sorry, the Road to Episode 6 boost campaign itself, making upgrading weapons cost nothing. You're probably thinking, what about the upgrade fodder to upgrade the weapons? Well, that's why I'm actually standing here, because if you check out the X-Cube shop, these are ridiculously useful for making that. You can use these to upgrade your weapons themselves, or if you happen to have tons of Lambda Grinders, or if you don't happen to have a ton of Lambda Grinders, you can take these, put them into 12-star weapons, and then use the 12-star weapons to upgrade. Super inexpensive, super awesome to do. And you're thinking to yourself, but that's X-Cubes. I have to save X-Cubes. Well, it's in the Photon Booster shop as well. So if you're doing tons and tons of AQs and you happen to have tons of Photon Boosters left over, and you weren't someone like me who got rid of a bunch of Photon Boosters for X-Cubes because you thought you're never going to need them, well, now you have somewhere to spend them. Probably the best use of Photon Boosters in the game right now, in my opinion. So not only is it super inexpensive to upgrade all of these items, you can get them super easy. And if you really don't want to pay for them, you don't have to. Rising Weapon Badge 4s cover you in that situation itself. So let's say you've made your weapon. Let's say you can't afford to augment it up to 6 slots. Well, I'm sorry, up to 8 slots. Well, even at a 6 slot, taking just some base augmentations, the 1 through 3s, Still fairly powerful. Let's say you're a class that uses precision will being crit damage. That's still 3% 3% in an S1 slot. We were going for 5% in an S1 slot, but that's still 3% in an S1 slot. So it's about a 2% damage difference, assuming you have 100% crit, of course. You also have the option of going something like Augmented Will, which is going to be a max of 4%. You'll be looking at 3.5 with a 7 slot, which is very, very attainable, substantially cheaper when it comes down to making weapons. And with this boost going on at the moment, upsliding to 7 slot is much, much more feasible than going to 8 slot. 8 slot's not that bad when you look at what we're doing, but 7 slot is a lot easier overall, and prices tend to drop pretty dramatically. You're looking at probably like an eighth of the price, if not even less, when you're going from 8 to 7 slot, which is pretty crazy. One thing I did want to note as well when making these weapons, I know this is kind of turned into a little bit of how you should make your Lightstream weapon itself, but there's a lot when it comes into this weapon, so I did want to cover all of it here as well, just to kind of drive home the fact that it's not that bad when people are kind of making it out to be. You can see that I did make one weapon that did require augment factor. Now I had to make these 2 pieces of fodder itself. Not that hard to make. It's just 3% of Reverie through Vinculum. Fairly easy to do. Probably cost a couple mil for each of these fodders to make them. But this is actually not that hard to get itself. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, you know, it's going to be the Selkaiser sword to make this, but we actually got a new limited quest. And the limited quest with these weird weapons, I was trying to figure out what's the point of them. Well, I figured out the point of them. They're actually stat SAF, and they support S1 through S3, meaning the upslot process, you've already removed 3 pieces of RNG from your upslotting. So super, super awesome. If you're not familiar with what this means, essentially, whenever you have an S grade augment on a weapon itself, that slot is 100% no matter what. It never fails, even during upslots. So when you're going from upslotting, or when you're going from RNGing 8 slots to RNGing 5 slots, it's a bit more in your favor, and it's a lot more substantial, or it's a lot more, what's what I'm looking for here? It's a lot less painful to do, let's just put it that way. So all of those things have to do with how to make a Lightstream, why making a Lightstream is so simple. Now let's double back to the original reason why we talked about this. Well, how is it still useful? Well, not only is it going to have its plus potential, it's going to bring it up to the power of a lot of other weapons. Its base ability and its potential, regenerating all of your PP, is extremely powerful. When you run out of PP, getting a full bar of PP back for free once every 2 minutes, not to count, you know, having something like your PP battery, so on and so forth, but in battle, just by hot swapping to a weapon and then swapping back to your other weapon you're using for damage, is crazy strong. And even in some cases, hot swapping this weapon, using it for 30 seconds and swapping back, depending upon how strong it is, crazy, crazy powerful. So all these things said, at the end of the day, these weapons are really, really cheap, really easy to make. If you don't want to invest, now I will tell you, if you can't afford to invest to make this an 8 slot, just don't. Make it a 6 slot, make it a 7 slot, use all these S grade augment slots. The most powerful point of this weapon is still its potential. Yes, strike boost is really, really good, but that's not the only reason to make this weapon itself. You can take this weapon and use it and have a very, very powerful weapon. No one is going to be freaking out over the fact that you have a 6 slot or a 7 slot that's properly affixed and using all 3 of your slots. What they're gonna freak out over is you using something like a 13-star weapon or something along those lines. And if you do find someone that's freaking out over the fact that you're not using an 8 slot version of this weapon, well, you don't want to play with those people anyway. Just ignore them and move on. I'll be honest, it's not something you have to go super hard into unless, you know, you're going to be using the weapon for like a lot. For example, I know with Etwell coming out, I'll be using this as a wand as well as a double saber, and then making a liberate or a rivelate, excuse me, a rivelate soaring blade. So having these 2 weapons already made means 2 of my 3 weapons are already done while I'm farming for the next weapon itself. So my use case helps me out there. However, that's not the use case for everyone. Just keep that in mind. And as always, if you can't afford to do something, don't do it. Find something that works within your range and then work with that. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. I've been mulling over how to record this video a couple of times now, how I wanted to do this, how I wanted to present it to you guys. But I've seen a lot of just skip, don't worry about it, ignore, so on and so forth. And that's probably one of the suckiest mindsets to have when it comes to the game itself, is we want to play. People want to play and enjoy themselves. And the good news is even if you invest a bit into these weapons, you're not losing out on your investment. It's still going to have use moving forward. It's still going to be very powerful itself. Is this going to be the case for everyone? No, not everyone's going to have the same use cases for these weapons themselves, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. If you are further on down the line, keep in mind, if you're outside of the boost week, for example, Would I say then maybe skip over this weapon? Possibly in those situations itself, because then you're looking at investing more into the weapon and you don't want to go bankrupt over making a weapon that you know that you're going to have something else coming on down the line that might be easier for you to make at that time. Always keep in mind what's available at the time that you're making the weapon and what might be available fairly soon on. But as always, guys, a like on the video is much appreciated. Absolves you of half your ad block guilt. The half is absolved by subscribing. Both are completely free and do help me out a ton. If you want to keep up with the content, click on the bell icon to be notified of when any videos go live, as well as community posts whenever I post them for the streams and things like that. And if that's not really your jam, you can always hop over into Discord or follow me over on Twitter to get notifications that way or interact with us. Thanks again, guys, for joining. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace out.